Hi, guys. Welcome to Pancreas Pals. Emily here. Miriam is still not back, but she'll be back next week, so no one freak out. This week, we have an extremely special guest who I am obsessed with following on Instagram, and he's just an all around dope person. Cameron from at young underscore gifted in black on Instagram, who is an advocate, a wannabe chef, even though I would probably classify him as one just based on his amazing food Instagram posts, and member of at the Diet Crew. Welcome, Cameron.
Thank you so much for having me on today, Emily.
I I am just like floored by your food prowess, but we'll get into that did not sound fun on my mic. Sorry, everyone. Cameron had done a takeover for us way back when on Pancreas Pals, and I have to say, your takeover was one of my faves, and that's not really something I say. I never really mention when people have done takeovers for us. So, gold star to you, but mostly I was just hysterically laughing when you got up from your desk and were like, "Okay, I have a really long commute to work," and then you moved to your next room because obviously
Oh,
quarantines. I still chuckle at that. I think that obviously, that's something that we're all going through, but the way that you delivered that had me in stitches. I was hysterical. So I'd like to thank you for bringing me joy during this time.
well, I'm glad I could bring you a little joy during these times.
Me too. And this was like a while back. So that's anyone who's like, wait, I don't remember this. We have a highlight of Cameron's takeover on our page at pancreas underscore palace on Instagram. I definitely recommend you go check it out. But, anyways, that's my long winded intro to Cameron. So, welcome, Cameron. Thank you for being on.
Awesome. Thank you again. I'm glad I can be on the show today and looking forward to the good conversation we'll have.
Love a good chat. But to kick us off, anyone who's listened to the pals before knows that we love to dive right into the diabetes aspect of everything. So, could you please share your diagnosis story?
Yes, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 9 years old. So I've been living with type 1 diabetes for 22 years at this point. And my diagnosis story is one not untypical for kids. My parents noticed that I was having frequent urination, dry mouth, and rushed me to the doctor's office to try to see what was going on. And they, of course, thought that I had type 1 diabetes, and we went straight to the emergency room. I think my parents like to remind me of how I playfully passed out when they told me that I couldn't have candy anymore because how do you tell a 9-year-old that they can't have sweets? Like,
That's tragic on so many levels, but the playful pass out really, I think that's just like a nod. Full disclosure, I've never met Cameron in person, obviously, but I feel like that's just a nod to your personality on the whole. That's iconic.
exactly. I could not process that, and it wasn't even that I ate a lot of candy as a kid. My parents will tell you I rarely ate candy as a child, but hearing that you couldn't just
Right. It
yeah,
You're mourning all those Halloweens, but,
exactly.
also, I mean, obviously, anyone who's listening who is any form of diabetic, can attest to this, but I do just wanna point out for all those non-diabetic listeners that food does not cause any form of diabetes, so, of course, Cameron can have whatever he'd like to eat, but, obviously, especially back then and just to maintain good shugs, as we like to say, candy's not always an easy thing to bolus for, to cover with insulin. So no one freak out and at Cameron for saying that he couldn't have candy because he's just living his best life. Anyways, moving on back to your story.
Exactly, and I think it was just the times, right? Because back then
Right.
insulin pumps were still not widely used as they are today. There was no CGM back then. It was basically you check your blood sugar and you use an injection to give yourself an insulin. And if you were fortunate enough to have an insulin pen, then you were sort of ahead of the game because those were just starting to get rolled out. And I think in my diagnosis story, my parents were adamant about learning how to care for me before we left the hospital. So we probably stayed maybe a week and a half before my mother was willing to let them discharge us to until she felt comfortable enough giving me an injection. And so I was out of school for a little while. My friends sent me notes and things, and
Oh,
some of them came to visit, pastors and friends and family. all came to check in on me just to see how I was doing. And then we were out and we got my first diabetic endocrinologist who was also a diabetic, a type 1 diabetic. And we recognized fairly quickly, or they recognized fairly quickly, that there were some disparities in how I and other patients of color were being treated by this particular endocrinologist, and the way that her white patients were being treated. We noticed that almost all of the white patients were utilizing technology like insulin pens. Many of them were using insulin pumps, but none of the patients of color in this particular practice were using those same technologies. Uh, so either they didn't know about them or they weren't asking about them, but we decided to ask. And when we were denied access, we started to wonder why, and that sort of led to my parents talking to the other parents in the waiting room, because this was before there was really a robust online chat system like we have now. We've got tons of Facebook groups, we've got the IG community, the Twitter community, we've even got a Clubhouse community now. But those things were non-existent back then. And so my parents were really adamant about advocating for me and what we needed to manage my diabetes, especially as someone who, even when I was in the best of shape, suffered from insulin resistance to some degree. And so they wanted to make sure that we had what we need. So we ultimately ended up changing um, endocrinologist to another endocrinologist in the same health system, but he was a person of color, and he immediately approved me for an insulin pump. He immediately put me in contact with a dietitian, with a nutritionist, with a certified diabetes educator, who all mentioned things that we had no knowledge about. We didn't know that diabetes camps were a thing that were that was even possible until we got partnered with this endocrinologist and his care team that he put us in touch with. And so from there, I got to go to diabetes camps with my family, and we enjoyed it a lot. I think one of the best things about being a kid was we would have group blood sugar check and group snack time,
Oh,
where all of us would go to the main lobby area. All of our parents would pull out all of our insulin and all of our glucose meters, and we'd all check at the same time, destigmatizing that, which was huge as for me as a kid. Um, but yeah, and so that's really my start to diabetes, and the lens that I viewed everything through is that diagnosis story, and then going up through my first endocrinologist and quickly having to get a second one within a year.
that is, I mean, for lack of a better word, and I feel like this is just the constant, but that's just heartbreaking. I mean, that that happened, but also that it is still happening and that you had to even go through that, your parents as well. I mean, just being a kid during all of this and looking up to your parents, and I mean, your parents obviously seem like amazing humans who care for you wholly and fully, and that's just, I think, for lack of a better way to put this in perspective, I obviously am a very privileged white lady, and my diagnosis, although did not come for a year, because of its own issues, but my first when they properly diagnosed me, I was sitting there and they were like, "Do you wanna get on an insulin pump?" And the fact that that was literally the first thing they asked me, and the fact that you had to fight for that and to fight for the knowledge for that is just disgusting, and I am sorry you had to go through that, but I'm sure that's, like, something you hear all the time now, and that doesn't mean much coming from me, but I appreciate you sharing that story with us.
Yeah, it was definitely something interesting that they offered to you right off the bat. That I wish we would have gotten the same um, introduction, but I and I see too that now insulin pumps are more common than they were back then, but they were still a tool that could have been used, and we were not given access to even
A
insulin
pen.
pens,
Yeah,
like, which is low tech, but for someone who
it
is
makes a big
was
difference.
deathly afraid of needles back then, that would have been a
Right.
huge change.
Syringes are scary. I'll be the
Yeah.
first person to say that. I mean, also, I guess that's true, the perspective in time,
Mhm.
but also I mean, I'm assuming you were diagnosed in Texas?
No, I was diagnosed. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. I was diagnosed in Alabama.
Okay, my bad. So, from Alabama,
Yeah,
and I was from and slash am still from Jacksonville, Florida, and, although our diagnoses were, like, probably 20 years apart, I'm not good at math, but I was just diagnosed 7 years ago, so definitely there are different perspectives, but I do fully believe that race plays a part in all of this, and that
yeah,
is just an awful thing, but I'm glad that you were able to find an endocrinologist that listened to you and provided proper information and was a person of color, and just f that's just a great, um, resource, but also the fact that you're now able to have a community, and be such an advocate that you are is amazing. So, have you heard any similar stories these days? I, like, feel like I'm that's probably an awful question to ask. I'm trying to figure out how to word my questions and help. But, obviously, medical racism is still prevalent today, and I know you're a big advocate and share really powerful resources. Everyone go check Cameron out at young_gifted and black on Instagram. But have you found that people are continuing to reach out to you with similar stories?
yes. I've connected over the last year with, particularly over the last year, with a lot of diabetics who have similar stories to mine, or stories that have parallels to mine. And I think it's not uncommon to see, um, unfortunately, the disparities in healthcare and access to the tools that we all need to survive, even just access to basic things like an insulin pump. I was in a webinar for a nonprofit. Maybe I wasn't participating, I was just viewing the webinar. Maybe about 4 or 5 months ago, and there was a black lady who probably a little older than I, a little older than you and I, um, who was diagnosed around the same age I was. Grew up in a small town where there was really only one or two doctors in the entire town, and had no idea that insulin pumps even existed. Right.
Right.
So I think we forget about that too. And the part of me that does advocacy, that's one of the things that I like to bring a lot of light to, is that we are all diabetics, but we're not all fighting the same fight. Some of us are growing up in rural areas where the nearest endocrinologist may be an hour or 2 hours away, and we have no knowledge of different types of insulin, different types of insulin therapies, CGMs. We don't have access to those things, and I think we often get lost because while I am a part of the diabetes online community, the diabetes online community is, we all have privilege to some
Very
degree,
much so.
right? We're a privileged group. I acknowledge my own privilege. We see others that look like us. Almost what 85% of the diabetes online community uses some form of a CGM, right? I'm just
Right.
throwing out that number. I don't know that to be true, but I would assume the
We won't quote
majority
you
of
on
us
that.
the majority of us use a CGM or some type of advanced tech to manage our diabetes. And as a part of, as being an advocate, we have to draw light to the fact that that's not the case. It's not the case here in the U.S., and it's definitely not the case globally. In the work that I get to do with one of the nonprofits that I partner with, um, and we need to be aware of that. We need to acknowledge that and really come to terms with it.
1,000%. And I mean, just anyone who's listening that has any questions about that, think of how you're listening to this podcast right now. You have access to the internet, you have access to a device that can connect you with other people, even if it's just the iTunes Apple Podcast app. I mean, that knowledge is power, right? And if we have access to the internet, access to these doctors, then that in itself is a leg up that a lot of people don't have. And I think that that's a big issue we definitely have in the diabetes online community. And I've noticed, at least for my own personal mental health, I've definitely had to take a step back this past year because there has been a lot of um, I don't ignorance, for lack of a better word. Whether obviously ignorance means that's not necessarily always intended, but some intended ignorance, if you will, as well. There's been a lot of polarizing issues that I think there is no there's only a wrong side to be on, and, I just really applaud you, Cameron, for all of your work on this, and we're trying so hard to be allies and continue to show the disparities, so,
Yeah. I
I'm
think what
just
you just mentioned, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, please do.
I think what you just mentioned is perhaps the most common thing that I've heard in the past few months. I was just in a clubhouse chat last week where we were talking about has anyone taken a break from IG or from the diabetes online community, and nearly everyone in the room said they've had to over the last few months, just because a lot of us have been a little disillusioned by what's going on there, and it can be a lot to take in. And we in the Diet Crew, you mentioned my involvement with them, and we hear that a lot from a lot of new diabetics who are really looking for good resources, um, but find different types of you need to be healthy and fit and meet this sort of aesthetic that doesn't always fit who they are and why they are. And it becomes, I think it exacerbates burnout in a
Yes,
lot of us, some form of burnout. And we have to be
1,000%.
careful with that too.
Miriam and I have actually had whole so Miriam's a licensed mental health counselor, which is always why I'm sad when she's not here, even if it's just for my free 20-minute session with her of me ranting on these podcasts. Um, it's definitely a topic that we cover a lot on, which is burnout, and we've had a whole episode on burnout and social media in this past year, especially for me. I just can't keep looking at all these perfect graphs of other people's numbers, myself included. I'm like I'll occasionally post a good one because I'm like really excited about it. But I will be honest in that my A1C has gone up this past year because it's a stressful time for everyone. But when I talk about needing to take a step back from the diabetes online community, I'm fully just saying my personal experience is that I've found a lot of ignorance this past year, and you can't argue with that to an extent. So I'm definitely still online and seeing things and posting things, but I only want to be a part of the progress. And there's just a lot of fighting back and forth. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, but I'm talking specifically about insulin for all. There's been some things going on that some people are just commenting very rude things to other people, and obviously a big proponent for insulin for all, but there's just a lot to take in during a pandemic, and there's only so much a person can do when they're also have to be on social media for my full-time job, my day job, and then also have the podcast. So anyone listening that's like gonna give me some hate for that, we're all living our own lives, and everyone can lead their life as they see fit with their social media and their diabetes. And I will do the same with mine. Hair flip. But back to Cameron, I do want to touch a little bit on your love for cooking. And you say wannabe chef. My mom is a chef. And let me tell you that your food looks like you have some form of amazing training. So I'm just going to go ahead and call you a chef because I think you deserve it. And I just want you to have, like, I want to eat half the things you post, or actually all the things you post, if I'm being honest. But can we get into that a little bit?
Yes, definitely.
So how did you start off with this love for cooking?
I think I got into cooking at a really young age. I was fortunate enough for both my parents to really teach me how to cook or how to do basic things. I have no classical training. And just throwing that out there. I've never been to culinary
Cameron's like,
school or
"Emily,
anything.
you're gonna get me in trouble. Stop." I'm like, "I just love everything you post. All of your food looks so good."
Yeah. And really, my dad, I think my dad may have taught me first how to make an omelet. That was one of the first things I ever learned how to cook is and a classic omelet, a classic country style omelet. And that sort of parlayed into my mom teaching me how to cook. And then when I got a little older, my mom went back to school. My dad was working longer hours, so I was cooking a lot of the meals for me and my sister and my parents at the time. And so I was doing a lot of cooking and experimenting on my sister, to be honest with you.
That's
Uh,
what siblings are for.
exactly. Doing everything from grilled catfish to other things and just testing it out. And it sort of parlayed into just becoming a side passion of mine, and something that I really love to do is to prepare and bake a good meals. And later in life, I think when I was in college, I got to take a food science prep course, which
Ooh,
really sparked my interest in um, how foods combine and the best way to cook different things, and how to utilize the other elements of cooking like steam to enhance or speed up your cooking time and things like that. And so um, that sort of gave me a little bit of the technique that I use now. It wasn't a full on cooking class or anything like that. It was a college elective, but I learned a lot from that course too. And I'm thankful I had that opportunity.
that sounds so cool. I do want to give you, I follow this woman on Instagram who is a chemist, I think. You should definitely give her a follow. She is a Lebanese like home chef, but her full job is actually like some kind of scientist. Her handle is at Alpha Foodie, ALPHA Foodie, and she talks about the chemical compounds of foods and why certain things taste good together in different forms of like different ways to cook things that you wouldn't think of, like steam. And it sounds very similar to your course, honestly. Give her a follow or give her a look. Her stuff is amazing, and she explains the chemical process and everything. And like for anyone else who loves to learn intricacies of things, like especially I feel like with diabetes, we all have a special relationship with food, whether that's something we're, struggling with or stressed about or just are interested in. Whatever your relationship is, it's your relationship, no judgment. But I definitely recommend giving Alpha Foodie a follow.
I'll
That's
definitely
just
check her out.
that's just me being like, "Hey, I love science." Um, but yeah, so your love for food obviously translates into a lot of your Instagram feed, which kind of makes me want to slowly but surely question you on how do you manage all of this the cooking with your blood sugars. I feel like it takes a lot of patience that I don't have, and it's something that I look for. So please teach me.
When you say patience with my blood sugars, do you mean blood sugars while cooking or the carb counts and things?
True, true. I meant carb counts because I love cooking and I do, obviously, I don't let diabetes stop me from experimenting and trying new things and, guessing. Because let's be honest, half of diabetes is guessing carb counts. I don't care if you've taken a million courses in it. Look me in the eye and tell me I'm wrong. I dare you. But I don't know why I'm coming out so savage today. Apologies, everyone. But, yeah, like, in terms of carb counts and how you manage that.
Yeah, I use a really good food counting scale that allows me to be able to see how many carbs are in different things that I'm cooking. But also, I try my best to something I picked up, and I think it was either on YouTube or on Food Network or something like that. But to try my best to calculate all of my ingredients in grams, especially
Ooh.
when I'm baking. That makes a huge difference in trying to figure out how many carbs are in a slice of cake that I'm having. Um, if I know how many grams of flour I use, if I know how many grams of sugar I used, and things like that. It helps a lot to be able to measure out in that way. As far as most food, most of things like potatoes and things like that, there's so many other factors that go into it that it does become sort of a guessing game. Because if we know anything about the glycemic index, is when we prepare foods differently, it also changes the release factor of the carbohydrates and of um, the complex sugars. And so it does become like a guessing game, because you could fry potatoes and get one reaction and bake them and get a completely different reaction. And so
Right?
I
Or
try my
you can have,
best to
like, the
just,
same ingredients.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say it could be, like, the same ingredients, like, they both use oil and they both use potatoes, but then your body breaks them down differently based on how they were processed for
Exactly.
cooking. That's so interesting. Um, yeah, so, okay, you heard it here first, folks, slash maybe you've already heard it, but this is new to me. Digital scale all the way. I need to invest in one of those. You'd think after 7 years of diabetes, I'd, like, have already had that tool in my toolbox, if you will. I sound like my doctor. Um,
I mean, I've
but
only had mine for like 3 or 4 years old.
okay, good, good. I'm not alone in this. Definitely a Hanukkah present or a present for myself worth buying for sure. But just another nod to the privilege in having
Yeah.
access to these things, and I think that that's I could do a whole I'm sure we could all do a whole episode on the disparities in how this affects our blood sugars. But to keep things on track, I won't dip back moving forward. Can you talk a little bit about creating your Instagram account and the culmination of diabetes, food, and advocacy that you now have on this account?
Yes, I think. Well, I always had the same. I've always had the same Instagram account, and I started it probably 4 or 5 years ago. But it was a private account at first that was really only for friends and family. And my partner's friends were looking at the account, and they kept mentioning that I should start a blog account or turn it into a lifestyle blog. Um, and I had been sort of hesitant about it because I also manage social media or social media managers in my in my real life, my work life, and
I
so
realize. Same though, same.
so I wasn't engaged in like social media as like something that I do all the time because I do it professionally as well,
Right.
or at least partly professionally. And so I was hesitant about it, and one day I decided, you know what, I'm just going to do it. And I flipped over the switch to make it a public profile. Decided to, because most of the content was already covering what they told me I should be posting about anyway. So why not just make that public? And from there, it sort of sparked. And probably about a year or two ago, as I was starting making my profile public, boosting the amount of content that I was putting out. That's how I fell into the diabetes online community on IG. Um, really coming across a lot of other diabetics, but I also fell into the food blog community on Instagram too, and the Black Food Blog Network too. And so, really, that's how I just made the decision. It was based solely on what my friends were telling us that I needed to do. I needed to make that something where people could see the types of recipes that you could create with just simple ingredients. Nothing that I create or cook has wildly unattainable ingredients. If you have a local grocery store, you can probably get most of the stuff that I cook with, especially considering that most of it is some form of pasta or grain or rice.
I was about to say your raviolis that you just made. I literally like have gone back and looked at it like 3 times. I feel like that sounds so creepy, but I love pasta, but I am guilty of being afraid of it in terms of diabetes, and that's obviously my own issues that I'm working through. But it's a big case for me to try and I mean, that's probably why I'm, like, obsessively looking at your account all the time because of all the pasta, but also because it looks delicious, and ravioli is my weakness, and it's definitely something I miss and is worth trial and error to find what works, but, I love that a lot of your sauces are creamy, and I think that that's a really good fat aspect in terms of carbohydrate absorption, to get into the sciency aspect of this. I think a lot of the stuff that you post is people always are like, "Oh, diabetes friendly foods." And it's like everything's diabetes friendly if you just, work on it and have or I guess maybe not everything. That's like a blanket statement and it depends on different types, but on the whole, the breakdown, the way your body breaks down food. Cameron's account, more love, looks super good and he has a great rule of thumb in terms of uh how he pairs foods. But your ramen with chicken teriyaki is like I can't. How was that? Can you just like describe the taste for everyone who hasn't been able to make it? Like I'm like over
it,
here living vicariously through you.
it was so delicious. It was the perfect amount of umami flavor with the perfect amount of um, sweetness and sort of creaminess of the sauce. I loved it. And chicken teriyaki is one of those things that, or teriyaki, I just sharing with a friend how to make a similar version of it with tofu that she put in her air fryer. It's so easy to make, and I think people get um, intimidated by it. But it's you can literally make chicken teriyaki with like three ingredients, right? If you've
Right.
got soy sauce, brown sugar, and your whatever your meat or meat substitute is, you can quickly whip up a chicken teriyaki and or teriyaki. And if you want to throw in some garlic or some onions for a little bit of flavor, that much more. And so that recipe was so easy. It was literally I didn't even make the ramen from scratch this time like I normally do. I
Well,
went to
that's
the
like a
Asian.
whole other that's a whole other like entire podcast that I feel like we could do. I'm like, for those who don't know, I'm a digital editor for Martha Stewart. So a lot of what I do is food writing, food editing. I'm not coming up with recipes, so that's like a bit. I'm always in awe of people coming up with the recipes, but I help edit and optimize them and things like that. But that I mean, I'm sure being a foodie and my mom being a chef is a huge reason why I'm drawn to your account. But the fact that you make ramen, like you've made that on your own. And like, I feel like you should have my job and I shouldn't. Like, I've never even attempted half of this stuff. I love it.
Yeah, it's fairly simple to make, but that one I just got from I went to the Asian food market and got an instant ramen brand that I like, and I had a little bit of veggie stock on hand and paired it with that, and um, to get the sort of cream. It wasn't veggie stock; it was a veggie broth that's a little bit more creamy, has a higher protein in it, and so it gave it a little bit more creamy aspect, and it was so good.
Guys, go check it out. It's on his Instagram. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up, but I feel like I could talk to you forever. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast again. This is the part of the show where I just profusely thank people for giving me their time. Um, and so if you have to go follow Cameron on Instagram, follow him at young_gifted in black. He has a Twitter too, but I can only spell out so many things for everyone. Um, and give us a follow if you don't already at pancreas_pals and on Facebook at pancreas pals pp. Slide into our DMs on both. Either we love to hear from you guys. I'm sure Cameron would love to hear from you too. And you can email us at pancreaspals123@gmail.com. We love to hear what you guys want to hear. So definitely slide into all of those things for us. Cameron, I can't thank you enough. You are just such a fun guy. And again, go check out his highlight on our Instagram. It's called Cameron's Take, and it just gives me a good chuckle. I seriously like I feel like this was definitely months ago. Here, let me click on it. Let me see how long ago this was because it's something I still think about. Yeah, it was 23 weeks ago. And I still think about you being like, "Oh, just your delivery of that just had me like lolling so hard." So again, thank you so much, Cameron. I really appreciate it, and I hope all the pals definitely go give you a follow and look at all of your amazing creations.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on today, Emily. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. So, guys, maybe we'll have slash I'll beg Cameron to come back on when Miriam's here and we can have a whole other conversation more in depth about everything we already just like lightly touched on. We do try to keep our episodes what used to be commute length and now is just short and sweet because I don't know about anyone else, but I don't have the attention span anymore during quarantine times. So, for more in depth, we'll follow up with Cameron at a later date. But everyone have a great week. Thanks for the millionth time, Cameron. And I will continue profusely thanking you off air. Everyone have a great week. And thanks so much for listening.